Apologies for not unmuting myself. Hello, everyone. My name is Amber Sowell. I am a coastal outreach specialist with Pennsylvania Sea Grant. Welcome to the Pennsylvania Lake Erie Environmental Forum on March 26, 2024. We have a very special focus today of harmful algal blooms and a great lineup of speakers for you. Just a couple logistics before we get started. This meeting is being recorded, and if you could type any questions that you have in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, that would be wonderful. That way we can organize the questions versus the chat box, which is also active. If you'd like to have any statements or drop resources or say hello in the chat to all of our friends that are on today, then please put those messages there. So thank you, and I will turn things over to Tim Bruno with DEP.
Hey, thank you, Amber. And I want to also welcome everyone to the March 2024 meeting of the Pennsylvania Lake Erie Environmental Forum. So we affectionately call this forum the PA LEAF. And my name's Tim Bruno. I serve as the Great Lakes Program Coordinator for the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection. And so it's kind of hard to believe that the last time that we were all together here was in May 2023. We were learning about advancing technologies in stormwater management. But for those of you who perhaps this is your first LEAF meeting, it's a forum that hosts informational sessions that allow participants to gain a deeper knowledge and appreciation of environmental issues that affect the Great Lakes. And since we are beginning a new series of LEAF meetings over the next year and a half, I want to express my gratitude to both Amber Stillwell and Kelly Donaldson of Pennsylvania Sea Grant. And as you will either know or will find out, Amber, she takes the lead on developing our themes, finding experts that speak with us on emerging Great Lakes topics. And Kelly really does a great job in assuring that everyone is kept up to date about LEAF activities, as well as if you have not been to the updated Pennsylvania LEAF web pages, I highly suggest that you visit there so that you can see previous meetings, what we discussed, as well as recordings of those events. And so today's topic of harmful algal blooms has been covered during previous LEAFs, but as you know, science advances, and we want our participants to have the most up-to-date science and policy information available. We're going to hear from local and state perspectives and about local and state perspectives and their activities. And then we're going to expand our scope as to how the Great Lakes states and provinces are approaching the policy aspects of HABs, as well as learn a little bit about HABs and how they contribute to hypoxia and anoxia in the central basin of Lake Erie. And that's otherwise known as dead zones. You may have heard that before. So I'll provide a few Great Lakes updates for today, but I'm open to any questions or conversation after today's meeting. You can contact me at tibruno@pa.gov. So that's tibruno@pa.gov, or at my phone number, which is 717-798-6001. And so in past LEAF meetings, we discussed the threat of invasive carp entering the Great Lakes and the potential effects that we would have on our food web, the fishery, our recreation and boating sectors of our economy. And Pennsylvania has been dedicated to assuring that invasive carp deterrents are eventually constructed at the Brandon Road Lock and Dam in Joliet, Illinois. And that's the connection between the Mississippi River Basin, where invasive black silver carp are making their way up the river, and the lock and dam is that connecting point between that river basin and Lake Michigan, which would allow them into the Great Lakes Basin. And so we want to make sure that those deterrents are installed at that lock and dam, that connecting point, as soon as possible. And there has been some very important updates over the last year on this topic. And since 2019, Pennsylvania has been involved in these high-level negotiations between the Great Lakes states and provinces, and they've been convened by the Great Lakes Commission in the states of Illinois and Michigan to move the project forward. But the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers has dedicated over $225 million of that agency's allotment of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act to getting that process started. Really, the only linchpin that is left is that the state of Illinois sign a cooperative agreement with the Army Corps of Engineers for this project to move forward. And it's being funded as of the Water Resources and Development Act that U.S. Congress passed in 2022 at a rate of 90% federal and 10% non-federal. So as you can see, over $110 million needs to be put up at a non-federal basis. And both the states of Illinois and Michigan have made state appropriations to fill that need. And so we need to get that agreement done as soon as possible. But even if we started today, that project would take until 2031 to complete. So really time is of the essence. Some updates on water use. And so the way that Pennsylvania participates with the other states and provinces in water management on the Great Lakes is through the Great Lakes and St. Lawrence River Basin Water Resources Compact and Agreement. And so these two entities are led by the Compact Council and regional body, and they're interstate compact agencies and an international body charged with the oversight of water use, water diversions, and the conservation and efficiency of the Great Lakes and St. Lawrence River. And so some of the activities that are going on in those two entities is that they're currently updating the 5-year science plan that will address issues such as better defining the water balance, understanding groundwater resources better, and examining how climate change could impact the basin. These two entities meet next, actually pretty close to us, in Buffalo, New York on June 13th and 14th. I will be there, and they are always open to the public. And so if you'd like information on how to join that meeting, either virtually or in person, that information and those details will be posted at www.glscompactcouncil.org or glslregionalbody.org. I will drop those links into the chat. As for our Pennsylvania's reported water use for the 2022 water year, remember that over our information trails behind by a year. It amounted to approximately 29 million gallons per day. And we are by far the lowest amount of water used per jurisdiction. We come up in just a sliver on a pie chart compared to the other Great Lakes states and provinces. Just a short update on the water quality side. The Great Lakes Water Quality agreement between the U.S. and Canada has been improving and protecting the water quality of the Great Lakes since 1972. We've learned about this in previous LEAF meetings. I encourage you to go back in some of those notes and recordings to learn more about it. You can find out more at the agreement's webpage, which is www.binational.net. Again, I will drop that into the chat. But specifically regarding our topics of today with HABs and how they're driven by nutrients. The Annex 4 subcommittee, which is commonly called the Nutrients Annex of the Water Quality Agreement, is charged with assembling data on loading into Lake Erie from phosphorus sources, both point sources and non-point sources. And so right now, US EPA and the Annex 4 subcommittee are gathering the data from the states and the province of Ontario as to their discharges. And so summaries of previous reporting can be viewed on the Great Lakes Commission's Erie Stat webpage. And that's under www.blueaccounting.org under issue and Erie Stat. And I'll drop that into the chat also. But that gives you an idea year to year how we're doing in meeting the targets that were set forth by the Annex 4 subcommittee for reducing phosphorus to Lake Erie. There's a 6,000 metric ton per annum per year target set for the central basin of Lake Erie. And they do the calculations every year to see how close we're getting. And Pennsylvania just submitted its recent 2023 calculated point source loading, and it was at 26.5 metric tons per annum. And not very much when you look at the overall scope of 6,000. And so that's a 16% decrease for Pennsylvania year over year from the 2022 point source loading. And what this is going to do is be combined with the modeled non-point source loading from our watersheds to give us the overall total that Pennsylvania contributes. And it's usually somewhere around 40 metric tons per annum. So just like I said, a small fraction. But with those updates, I'd like to now turn it back over to Amber, and she's going to introduce our first speaker of the day.
Thanks, Tim. Let me get my notes up here. I am so thrilled to have Brianna Adams here. Brianna and I have worked collaboratively together for quite some time now. Brianna is serving as the Director of Environmental Health Services at the Erie County Department of Health, or ECDH. Brianna returned to Erie after completing her Bachelor of Science degree in biology from Clarion University. Within her role at ECDH, she has had the opportunity to be involved in many programs, including food safety, on-lot septic, vector control, licensing and permitting, as well as beach and harmful algal bloom monitoring. So thanks for being here with us, Brianna, and I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Amber. I have a presentation to share with you all today and just wanted to confirm that you can see it in the right view.
It's not up yet. Let me know.
Up on my computer. Okay, sorry. We did practice.
We did. I can see it now, but not in presentation mode. There we go.
Okay.
Looks great.
Perfect. All right, so thank you all very much for being here today, and thank you, Amber and Tim, for the opportunity to share a little bit about the Lake Erie Harmful Algal Bloom Task Force and the response that we've had to harmful algal blooms over the past 10 years now. And so, Amber, thank you very much for the introduction. Like she mentioned, I've been at Erie County Department of Health for 12 years, 12 years today, actually, and been more active in my role with the HAB task force for the past 5 years. Erie County Department of Health has been able to support beach bacterial testing for about 20 years now, but then naturally became involved with the harmful algal bloom response as well. Unfortunately, we'll talk more about different funding and different avenues later in the presentation, but we are glad to be a part of such a collaborative group aiming to respond to the algal blooms altogether. The most basic question I thought to start with was just, what is a harmful algal bloom, and making sure that we're all talking about the same thing. As we are in public health, we always use a lot of acronyms, and so it's very easy to just roll HABs off the tongue and not think about what we're really talking about, right? And so it's colonies of algae that would grow out of control, produce toxic or harmful effects on people, fish, shellfish, marine mammals, and birds. We know that algae are generally good things, but sometimes they can just overproduce or produce those toxins. On occasions, they can also smother aquatic life by using all the oxygen in the water and produce different colored water. We've heard or we know that there's a variety of different colors of algae that can produce these toxins. There's blue-green algae, which we'll talk about, red tides, all kinds of different ways that they can be harmful. And so it's really that large group of them. And they're not only found in the Great Lakes or in Lake Erie. So I've shared a bunch of headlines from all around the country, all around the world, and every U.S. coastal state or Great Lakes state is experiencing harmful algal blooms at this point. When it comes to what makes the algal blooms harmful, it is that cyanobacteria. So it's that bacteria and toxins as they're kind of dying off that would appear in the waterway, and that's what we've been able to test for. So within Lake Erie and Presque Isle Bay, we've been able to test for and observe 4 different toxins produced by harmful algal blooms. Those 4 toxins are listed there as microcystin, anatoxin, saxitoxin, and cylindrospermopsin. And the Regional Science Consortium is the lead group that takes on that sampling. So there are summer staff that will go out and collect samples. I'll share those maps and everything as we get further into the presentation. And then they would analyze those for those toxins. But I think it's really important to just keep in mind that it's the toxins that are making the people sick, and that's been a big part of, or people or pets could make people or pets sick. And that's been a big part of the education that we've had to do and the outreach that we've had to do to people, is that you can't always see it. The toxins may still be in the water, and a big part of our educational outreach. Always just the map is really neat to show, especially in Lake Erie, where you can see on the western basin of the lake, how the blooms can grow into the water. So this photo is just from August of 2015, and it's through the NOAA Coast Watch Great Lakes Regional Node, or MODIS. So those satellite images are available all the time. They're available at different, you can watch it progress as the season goes along. So I picked August because we know August is warm, and usually a time when we are seeing those harmful algal blooms. So you can see them kind of along the shoreline and then in that western basin. When it comes to Lake Erie, what we have started to do with our response was in 2013, there was the formation of the Lake Erie Harmful Algal Bloom Task Force. And so the kind of original members, as far as I recall, was Pennsylvania Department of Conservation Natural Resources. They oversee Presque Isle State Park, and the park's a really important part of our response because it sees over 4 million visitors a year, and has that shoreline where people are out interacting with the water, whether that's swimming, whether that's with their pets or fishing or boating. And so obviously a key part, the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection through the Office of the Great Lakes, Erie County Department of Health, the Pennsylvania Sea Grant, the Regional Science Consortium, and then also citizen science volunteers. And so when that task force was originally formed, everybody got together and really started working on a monitoring and response strategy, and that was adopted then in early 2014. And so, as I've mentioned, there are the 2 kind of separate parts of that strategy. There's the monitoring, where we're out and looking for doing regular routine samples in hopes of maybe someday making a predictive model, or being able to compare year to year, see what is happening within the lake and within the bay areas that we're able to sample. But then also, how are we responding, and how are we letting people know what's in the water, when they should be concerned, why they might be concerned, and providing that outreach. I did see a couple of the original members on the guest list for today too, so hello everybody. We then continued to welcome additional partners into the HAB task force. So that includes Erie County Conservation District, Erie Waterworks and Northeast Water Authority, the Port Authority, Fish and Boat Commission, and then local university representatives as well. It's really neat to have the water authorities there and available during those meetings, and in the interim, because of the Toledo water crisis that had happened when some of those toxins were found in their drinking water, and their city water supply was shut down for several days. So we know that that's an important part to keep our water authorities who are providing drinking water on the task force and working together at our HABs response. I've mentioned the testing sites that we have along the lakeshore and around Presque Isle Bay for those cyanotoxins. We worked a lot then too on our educational response. So the HAB lab is something that was purchased again by the Regional Science Consortium, and they've been able to take it to different events, kind of along the western side of the state. I know they've had a few, not solely within Erie County, in different areas, to take the HAB lab to and show people what the samples look like, what some of the water looks like that might have the blue and green algae in it, and being able to do that. We've also worked a lot on signage, which I'll show in another slide, but making sure that the signage was something people could read and would be able to respond to, and that they would know, again, what they're looking at, and then working closely with our media partners as well. At the end of the season, we've also been uploading our data into, well, the data that is collected by the Regional Science Consortium has also been uploaded then into the CDC's OHABs database. So that's a voluntary database, but it stands for One Health Harmful Algal Bloom System. And so used to then track harmful algal blooms throughout the country. And their reporting is about a year behind as well, from my understanding, but they have that available for us to input things into and then get that at a year glance and be able to compare year after year. Our signs, again, we have different signs for different reasons. So some general educational signs, you know, if in doubt, say stay out. Obviously, if the water is looking like paint or pea soup, you don't want to go into it, making sure that people recognize that and aren't just, you know, going out and diving right in. And then we also have signage available when the toxins do exceed the thresholds that we had set forth in the response strategy. One is specific for dogs, because we know that that dog threshold is very low. And so those are the most common advisories that we have. So we will put that sign up pretty frequently throughout the season. And then the other sign has people swimming and is an avoid all contact with this water if those thresholds would be exceeded. When it comes to testing sites, there's been between 25 and 30 testing sites for the past several years. There's about 6 zones on the lake side of Presque Isle State Park that are being tested, and then, or samples are being collected from, and then 12 sites within Presque Isle Bay. They then also collect samples from different lakeshore sites from Freeport Beach out northeast, so really close to the New York state line, to Elk Creek, which is pretty close to the Ohio state line, so that we have a really comprehensive view along the lakeshore as well as within the bay and the beaches. If a harmful algal bloom is reported, like a surface scum or something, then as long as there's staffing and supplies available, I do believe that the Regional Science Consortium would go and grab a sample from them. We've also done some testing at inland lakes when available. So like Edinburgh Lake or Lake LaBeouf, as that might be a partnership that we can look forward to in the future too. In 2023, and hopefully this season, the plan is to test all the sites for all 4 toxins weekly. In previous years, there had been times that microcystin was being tested for every every year, but then maybe like saxitoxin or anatoxin were being tested for every biweekly or monthly. But so they have been able to test for all of those toxins weekly and hope that that will continue. We then put out a map that's interactive and includes both our bacteriological samples and our harmful algal bloom results. So those have been denoted in the past by the pin drop colors with like a red, yellow, or green system, depending on if there had been an advisory or a restriction for bacteriological, and then also the photos of the HAB signs. As you can see on the screen, like that dog being crossed out, are ways to tell when there's a dog advisory or not. And so that was being updated with our bacteriological advisories early in the week, and then harmful algal bloom results would go up on about Thursdays or early Friday morning of each week. And then we would look forward to headlines like this one where the dog swimming advisories are issued, but it went a really long way to make the information available in a map form to the public. We've hosted that then on our website, the Regional Science Consortium website. I think that the Sea Grant also has links to it on their website. And so making sure that people know where to look, they can see, oh, if there's an exceedance, you know, at Elk Creek, maybe I could go to another place with my dog. And really just making sure that people have the information available to them. We are working, this is a Google map that we've used for the past several years. We are working with Esri and ArcGIS this year to update some of our bacteriological sampling on the map, and then would like to include the harmful algal blooms in that as well. I didn't think it would be right to end without a couple of ongoing challenges. Just to share some of the challenges that we faced in the past 10 years and what we are working towards ongoing. And so some of it is training of team members to collect and sample harmful algal blooms. It takes a lot of time out of their workloads in the summer. There's obviously safety precautions that they're taking when we're telling people, you know, these are harmful to your pets or possibly to you. And then, hey, team member, can you please go in the water and grab these samples? Also laboratory safety as well. A lot of the times it is summer intern staff that are collecting those samples. Transportation to sample sites has been an issue in the past couple of years. So as I've mentioned, the samples being collected along the lakeshore is quite a drive, and sometimes people don't want beach water in the back of their vehicle. So trying to find rentals that are available or enough vehicles to be able to get all of those samples and return them to the lab in a timely fashion so they can be tested. And then trying to build out a predictive model is something that's ongoing. And so being able for the past year or two to sample all 4 of those toxins weekly is something that we think has really been able to help with that. But then figuring out where it would go from here, because funding has been a challenge to secure funding for more than a season or 2 at a time. Additionally, some previous grants have only covered Lake Erie work, so work along that lake shore, and that's why we haven't been able to do so much work at inland lakes. And it will sometimes limit the amount of testing, whether that's based on supplies or the actual lab cost. The last challenge is that ongoing public perception and education. And you might see some of my COVID battle wounds here from public health, but just really trying to get the public to understand why we're doing this, what the risk could be to their pets, why there are dog limits and not that are exceeded frequently and not human limits, and why signs might be up when the water looks perfect and it's a lovely day out has just been an ongoing challenge. And so really trying to continue that education and see if it would be something that is just a seasonal routine education outreach programming that we do, similar to what we would do with mosquito season or with the bacteriological samples of the beaches. But there's definitely people talking more and more about it. And so I think that we're definitely gaining some ground there, but it's still just an ongoing challenge. That is everything that I had for you all today, but I do have my contact information available, and I'm not sure, Amber, if there is time for any questions.
We do have time for questions, so I encourage anyone that has questions to type them in the Q&A boxes. And I see one in the chat. Jim asks, was the HAB Lab funded by a DEP environmental education grant?
Jim, I want to say yes, that was by the Regional Science Consortium, and I know that they apply for and receive a lot of different grants with a lot of different outcomes. So I would like to think that that's correct.
I believe that that is also correct, if I can offer my stake in the game there.
Yes.
Another question from Christine came in. Is there a threshold in phosphorus concentrations that triggers HABs?
I do not have that information available. I don't know that it'd be a threshold like in phosphorus concentrations. We know that the nutrient loading as it goes into the lake has impacts the amount of harmful algal blooms that we're seeing or the concentrations, but I don't know that there's like once we hit a certain level of phosphorus that there would be a more bloom or more algae available.
I think some of our following presenters will likely fill in the spots there with
Thank you.
the science that's being updated on how harmful algal blooms, increase in toxicity, or when they begin to start producing toxins. That's a highly researched topic right now, and so that body of knowledge is continually evolving. And also, Brianna, seeing some of the activities that Pennsylvania has undertaken, going the whole way back to when the Lake Erie HAB task force was first formed. All of this has also helped inform not only the state but also other states and other forums whenever we have relayed the information as to what we've found here in our practices. So we thank you for the help at the Erie County Department of Health.
Thank you.
Not seeing any other questions, but if any pop in, please feel free to answer them in there, or we can always circle back if you're still on with us. Okay, thank you so much, Brianna. Feel free to hit your reaction button and give her a round of applause. Not sure if you can see mine, but it's floating up. And we will move on in our agenda. So next up, I'm happy to introduce Erica Arnold from the Pennsylvania DEP. Erica is the Environmental Group Manager for the Monitoring Section of the Water Quality Division within the Bureau of Clean Water. Her background includes biological and chemical data collections in streams, rivers, and lakes throughout Pennsylvania. For the past several years, Erica has been heavily involved in Pennsylvania's harmful algal bloom program, primarily having responsibilities with statewide data collection coordination, technical coordination, and data management. So thanks, Erica, for joining us, and I will turn it over to you.
All right. Thanks, Amber. Thanks for inviting me here today. Just give me a second to bring up my screen. I move some things around here. Okay. Oops. So like Amber said, my name is Erica Arnold. I work for the Bureau of Clean Water, Water Quality Division Monitoring Section out of Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, Central Office, DEP. Today I'm going to talk to you about the statewide Pennsylvania HABs program. So Brianna just gave a great overview of what folks do in Lake Erie, but we do have a big state with a lot of lakes that we also monitor for HABs. So I'm going to walk you through what we do on a statewide basis. So my general outline today, I'll give a program history. We started the program around 2018 and are continuing here today. I'm going to describe our task force strategy and overview, briefly touch on data collection protocols, sample processing, and data management, and provide a summary of our HABs data from 2018 to last year. So HABs program history, the DEP started data collection in 2018 with limited efforts through 2019. Some of those, in those years, we were starting to develop protocol. So what techniques do we use to collect the data? What laboratory procedures are best suited to test what we're after? So we used those 2 years to kind of develop the program. At the end of the year and into 2020, we formed a HABs policy task force similar to what Lake Erie did. And we really took off with data collection. We had collected 155 samples in that year. That's pretty impressive for 2020 and the closures and stuff for the pandemic. In 2021, we continued to focus on the HABs policy task force objectives and included some of our DEP's missions as well. So with that, efforts doubled between 2020 and 2021. And amongst our staff and volunteers, we collected 335 samples across the state. In 2022, that effort almost doubled the 2021 effort. And last year, we were pretty similar to the 2022 effort. I have some slides later on that shows that data. So our task force, who's it made up of? What do we do? What work groups come out of this task force? So our task force is largely ran by the different agencies throughout the Commonwealth, the Department of Health, the Department of Environmental Protection, the Department of Agriculture, Fish and Boat Commission, the Game Commission, the Department of Conservation and Natural Resources, and our Emergency Management Agency. Each have different roles and stakes within our task force. Generally, the Department of Health, the DEP, and the DCNR are the most active in our task force, but there are others that we rely for specific guidance in terms of agriculture and Fish and Boat Commission regulations and the Game Commission. So the Department of Health specifically has the authority to regulate our public bathing and swimming beaches. So typically, they're the ones that are making recommendations to those public-facing beaches based off of the data that we collect. My role, like Amber had stated, is coordinating all the data collection efforts across the state, collecting the data, managing that data, and putting that data out to the public for consumption. And then the DCNR, they're responsible for education in their parks. They also monitor and survey their different beaches and their parks and relay that information back to us to develop a strategy for data collection. It's our general mission that this is a coordinated statewide effort to develop a comprehensive approach to build awareness, monitor, share information, and data to prevent HABs in the Commonwealth. So we have our policy task force. We also have a technical work group that is comprised of some members from the policy task force, but it also is comprised of other technical level toxicologists, biologists, laboratory specialists, etc. And we're the technical work group drives some of our recommendations. We do the research and provide that back to policy task force to then implement our advisories and our thresholds that we have. I will state that there are currently no Pennsylvania or federal regulatory human health standards for drinking water or recreational use for cyanotoxins or cyanobacteria. What I have displayed here on the screen is based off of a combination of EPA guidance, World Health Organization publication, multiple state and county HAB strategy documents, compiling all that data and information that drives what our response thresholds are. Other uses, including animal or pet exposures, we do not currently have any recommended response level thresholds for those. So I'm curious as to Lake Erie seems to have some kind of dog-related threshold, maybe a follow-up conversation to pursue with that down the road. But like Tim has stated, the science is always changing. So we do look at these advisory thresholds. Occasionally, these ones were just updated here at the middle of last year. So we operate on a two-tiered system specifically for our primary contact recreational use lakes and those particular beaches. Like I said, the Department of Health does have the regulatory authority to close a beach based on those health conditions and those thresholds. Other lakes that do not have beaches will get a blanketed warning if we do see something. So we base our recommendations off of colony counts or cyanobacteria densities. We also use toxin thresholds for microcystin, Silurindros vermopsin, and a toxin A, saxitoxin. And you can see those different levels there. We do have a 10-day drinking water health advisory for cyanotoxins, and those are provided in Table 3 on this slide. All this information can be found on DEP's HABs website. As we review the data and we make recommendations, when we're making recommendations to specific lake managers, we have these signages in which folks can choose to use. The first one here is look out for harmful algal blooms. This would be considered a watch sign that we would post around the lake or at different areas where people are recreating. And then we also have the advisory and warning signages that tell you what not to do, what you might want to do after you are in contact, or just to avoid the water altogether. Again, these signages are available on our HABs website, DEP HABs website for use. So how do we respond to a harmful algal bloom report coming in? So our response strategy is dependent upon awareness and is informed by surveillance and monitoring. And then we base, some of that information based off of those response level thresholds that I had just provided, and then we make those recommendations. So typically what happens is a visual observation can be reported to us directly to the task force using pa.gov email address. This typically prompts an investigation to understand where the water body is, who has management capabilities over that water body, and who might be available to collect a sample. Similarly, we also have an account where health concerns go to. Occasionally, but rather rarely, do we come across any health concerns associated. But again, that also prompts an investigation and also prompts an immediate watch because there's some kind of level of health that is in effect. So our surveillance and monitoring can go two ways. Images sometimes can lead us to recommending a watch to lake managers, but sample results are really driving our response and what we do. So a watch would be blanketed on all of the water bodies that we test if we find that a HAB is a problem. but we can also do those advisories and warnings at beaches. The task force that we have does the recommendations and communicate the results to the lake managers. It is up to the lake managers to follow through with signages. And like I said, all secondary locations get a blanketed watch if we suspect a problem. Regulated beaches will get either an advisory or warning if the results show that. Closures will remain until sample results show improved conditions outside of the warning thresholds. So part of our strategy is sort of this cyclics guidance here that we have, where we're using a visual to kind of start the process of data collection. We're using that data to compare to our thresholds to either provide a watch, an advisory, or a closure. I'm not going to go through this step by step, but basically we can continue this in a circular motion until our results prove to be outside of those warning level thresholds or those advisory level thresholds. Oops. So our monitoring approach, we have a couple different approaches. The first two are a reactive approach. Sometimes we have staff and biologists out there that are doing routine field work. They'll see something that resembles a HAB. They typically have bottles to collect a sample. Using their best professional judgment, they will submit that sample to us. Another reactive approach would be one that I had been describing already. Is oftentimes people use that resource account to report a HAB. We'll start by gathering information regarding, where specifically the harmful algal bloom was on the lake. Is it lake-wide? Who might be the lake manager we can contact to gather information to go to that site. And then we also, have a ton of collectors out there. Just seeing who's available, we'll coordinate with those collectors to go collect a sample. And then we also have a proactive approach where it's more program specific. Sometimes we will grab a harmful algal bloom sample if somebody's out doing assessment related field work on lakes for DEP or for criteria development. We have a few different sampling procedures that we use. We recognize 4. Each of them are used in different circumstances. The ones that we use most often are our transect and surface water sampling procedures. Our transect procedures are used in situations where we have a large area where we're sampling. So beaches, for instance, will use a transect to gather a composite sample of 9 different grabs throughout the beach area to provide a representative sample of that entire area. Scum sampling is for those blooms that typically have, washed up against the shoreline, and we're interested in that particular small area. A surface sample we'll collect like out in the middle of the lake if your whole lake is completely like pea soup green, for instance, and very uniform in its bloom characteristics. And then we also have a depth sampling technique that we use occasionally. If you run like vertical profile water quality measurements, you'll see changes in DO and pH at specific depths. Sometimes this is an indication that algae are hanging out at that location. So we'll collect a depth sample using a Van Doren sample. I'm not going to play these videos today, but they are available here with the links of the general procedures that we follow to collect a transect or a surface sample and that depth sample. With any data collection, each collector will fill out a HABs field data collection sheet. This data collection sheet allows us to know the exact location of the bloom, why we were out there sampling, what sample method we were using, associated water quality measurements if somebody has equipment to take those, and then general bloom descriptions. This is a form, a hard copy form, but we also use a Survey 123 field form application, which links up to ArcGIS Online and provides our data managers the opportunity to see real-time data collections so that we can inform the task force. Our samples get submitted to our Department of Environmental Protection Bureau of Laboratories. This is an example of our sample submission sheet. I am highlighting here 2 columns. These 2 columns help us rank the samples when they get into our laboratories. We were coming across having multiple samples submitted at once. The lab was struggling a little bit to prioritize themselves. So we definitely needed a ranking system. This was our ranking system. So generally how we do this is, for instance, if we get a bloom and we're in a beach location, that rank is number 1. So those samples will get prioritized to be analyzed prior to something where we're just out there routinely sampling at a water body that has no primary recreation in those areas. Like I said, we collect field data. That field data gets logged using the Survey 123 app and various databases within the Department of Environmental Protection. That field data then gets linked with the lab results when those are available. This logging and data entry is extremely important to our task force, as this begins the line of communication between our collectors, the lab, and the task force, and anticipating any needs for recommendations. Our post-processing, typically when a sample is collected, samples arrive at the lab next day. With the exception of Fridays, we typically do not collect on Fridays because the lab is not opened. Our Bureau of Labs receive the samples, they log their samples into the database, and then they start subsampling and processing our samples. The first thing that we do and analyze for are a cyanobacteria screen. So we'll have laboratory staff look in the microscope and identify what cyanobacteria may be present and at what concentrations those cyanobacteria are present. We do this first to see what cyanobacteria are there that are producing toxins. Some cyanobacteria don't produce toxins. Some cyanobacteria only produce microcystin. Some will produce all 4 of the toxins. So by having that screening of what's actually in your sample, we're able to pick and choose what toxins we run, sort of as a cost saver for us. If any of our samples have a combined natural unit count of over 300, those will be forwarded along to toxin analyses. All results, as soon as results are in, the lab communicates those to our data managers, which then simultaneously get made available to our HABs policy task force to make those recommendations. Additionally, we have a public-facing dashboard that gets updated twice a week throughout the recreational season for real-time data sharing. So I briefly went over, sort of our processes. Well, let's take a look at our data now. So like I said, we've been collecting data from 2018 through 2023. We're actually in the process of getting ready for the 2024 season. As you can see in these graphs, we really took off with sampling in 2022 and 2023. Last year, we collected over 500 samples statewide across 75 water bodies. This is a screenshot of what our dashboard looks like. This is all data collected. I will note here that there's some color coding here based off of if HABs were detected or not, and what those thresholds will look like. Just caveat this a little slightly with how to interpret this map. These are strictly all samples compared to our thresholds. You would have to zoom into each of those specific dots to understand if it was a beach location or not, and if a beach was closed. So what does the data look like? So like I said, the first thing we do is we do a cyanobacteria screen. And we do have thresholds for the cyanobacteria. So as you can see, many of our samples provide us just watch conditions where we have less than 300 concentrations of cyanobacteria. Occasionally, we will have samples that exceed those warning thresholds, which is that 1,500 number. Less often do we see the warning thresholds at beach locations, but there are still warnings that we have established based off of those cyanobacteria screenings in those primary contact lakes. This is the microcystin data. Again, we have more non-detects than we do have advisory or warnings being provided to the data. Less so in beach samples. Typically, we're not closing beaches based off of microcystin data, with the exception of a few samples in 2022 and 2019. Improving slightly from microcystin, saxitoxin generally also has a lot of non-detects. We do detect saxitoxin occasionally, but no really occurrences of any saxitoxins that were over those warning thresholds, particularly in beaches. Anatoxin, again, a similar trend, a lot of non-detects, though it's kind of even-steven throughout the past 3 years there in 2021 and 2022. But in 2023 at the beach locations, there were only a few advisories issued. Cylindrospermopsin, typically most of the time we have non-detects. The past 2 years in beaches, we have had non-detects. Similarly to all the other lakes that we have sampled are largely non-detects for cylindrospermopsin. These are just a few images that we have taken over the past couple years. The top 3 images show you sort of a lake progression month to month at a lake here in the middle part of the state. This is Tuscarora Lake. So you can see where we had a bloom in June of 2022. When we went back in in July of 2022, the bloom conditions had cleared up. And then in August, if you can see in the top left corner of that Tuscarora Lake 8.4 sample, you can start to see that bloom appearing in that small little cove again. The Middle Creek Lake sample there in the middle left portion of your screen was a bloom that kind of persisted throughout the summer, fairly characteristic of scum up against the shoreline. Walker Lake there, you can see where the water is the same color as the grass. That is a typical occurrence at that lake throughout the whole year. And then the bottom pictures, again, is a bloom progression at a beach location where we got a report of a bloom on 8/15, 8/16. We had some scum formation the next several days. And then about a week or so later, the bloom had gone away again. So with that, I will take any questions.
Excellent. Thank you, Erica, for taking the time out today to address the leaf. And, you know, I saw a lot of correlations there between the work that some of the partners here on Lake Erie in Erie have done in the past. And also some comparisons of scope. Like for instance, we have the entire Commonwealth to really address. And as DEP has gone out, we've collected hundreds of samples. And the Regional Science Consortium here at Presque Isle, because we have millions of people who come here to recreate every year at Presque Isle State Park. It's the most visited state park. The public health component of that and safety component of that is really important. They collected almost 16,000 samples between 2019 and 2023. So that gives you a really good idea as to scope. And so that brings to mind, the question of scale and effort that really go into this. The Regional Science Consortium was only collecting every week. And as you know, these blooms can rise up and come down in toxicity very, very quickly within almost hours. And so we realized that even sampling weekly, it wasn't enough. And so these are labor intensive. They require a lot of money and manpower and lady power. At the end of the day, you may not be catching everything. There is a project currently underway between several federal agencies, EPA, NOAA, and USGS, and it's called CYAN, the Cyanobacteria Assessment Network. Do you have information on that, and could you let our participants know a little bit about it?
Yeah, I've sat in on a few webinars of that CYAN program. They're using a lot of imagery technology to try to predict blooms and where they're occurring. So like you stated, like these blooms can pop up anywhere. They can appear in 1 hour and then disappear in another hour. So they're trying to do some real-time satellite imagery modeling to help folks predict where a bloom might be, to go out and collect, to be kind of reactive to those situations. I think that it's kind of a newer program that EPA has been steer running, but it's really, I think, going to be a helpful tool for lake managers, particularly that are interested in what their lake is doing, to provide those opportunities for data collection. Really, we like to say that, you're not going to know until you take a sample. You really do need that water sample to provide you with that knowledge of what's happening. So you could, as you can see by my grass, sometimes those toxins just aren't there, but the cyanobacteria concentrations are. So how protective do we need to be? Yeah.
There are a bunch of questions on the questions and answers area. And Erica, if you're not going to have to leave right after the presentation here, if you could take a few minutes to go into the question and answers and potentially provide some answers to that so we can keep on track and time, that'd be great.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank
Excellent.
you, guys.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Bye-bye.
Amber?
Thanks, Erica. Thanks, Tim. Like Tim said, we want to stay on schedule. So we had a scheduled break from 2 o'clock to 2:05. So let's plan to take just a quick 2-minute break. If you need to get up and stretch, grab a drink of water, you can do that. So meet us back here in 2 minutes at 2:05 and we'll get started. Welcome back, everyone. I know that was a short break, but we have so much great information to share with you, and I'm thrilled to invite Connor Ressler to the stage, the electronic stage. Let me pull up my notes here. Connor, we welcome you. Connor is with the Great Lakes Commission and will be talking with us today about the Great Lakes HABs Collaborative. Connor is a program specialist with the Great Lakes Commission working on water quality and nutrient reduction programs for the Great Lakes based in Ann Arbor, Michigan. Connor received his BS in environmental science from the University of Virginia and his MS in environmental education and communication from the University of Michigan. Prior to his work at the Commission, Connor worked as an environmental educator in West Virginia for the Great Lakes NOAA Be-Wet education program. So thank you, Connor, and I will turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Amber. Really happy to be here providing a little bit more of maybe a regional perspective on what's going on with harmful algal blooms, especially as they relate to the Great Lakes. So yes, I am Connor Ressler. I'm a program specialist here at the Great Lakes Commission. And I want to thank Vice Commissioner Bruno for inviting us as part of the HABs Collaborative to be here to talk a little bit about what we do at the Great Lakes HABs Collaborative with our mission of linking science and management to reduce blooms. And this, of course, relates then to Pennsylvania being part of the Great Lakes Basin. So to start, I guess I should probably answer the question of like, what is the Great Lakes HABs Collaborative? So the Great Lakes HABs Collaborative was established in 2015 by the Great Lakes Commission and then the USGS Great Lakes Science Center. The Great Lakes Commission, we provide more of the administrative support to facilitate some of the meetings and house the webpage and organize some of the creation of the products that the Great Lakes HABs Collaborative creates. And I'll go through some examples of what those products look like. Conversely, USGS provides funding and technical expertise and serve on the HABs Collaborative's core team to lead the effort. So in addition to both USGS and GLC staff, the core team includes co-chairs representing state or Canadian provincial agencies or academia. So the Great Lakes HABs Collaborative seeks to improve communication among scientists and between scientists and decision makers on issues related to harmful algal blooms in the Great Lakes. So really we're trying to fit in that in-between space between some of the really great research that happens in the Great Lakes HABs sphere and then all the great management, treatment, policy side, and how do we get those people talking to each other. So trying to visualize exactly what the HABs Collaborative looks like. This diagram goes into a little bit of some of the key players for the HABs Collaborative. So it does involve several different types of roles and different types of groups of people. And they're all kind of interconnected in this diagram. So the collaborative the work done by the collaborative is overseen by the steering committee, which is the smallest circle on here. And this is a group of about 26 people, and they are the ones that make the decisions regarding the direction and the focus of the collaborative. And these are usually agency heads, academic researchers, some policy leads throughout the Great Lakes states and provinces, and they are led by 2 elected co-chairs. These elected co-chairs meet monthly with the USGS and then our GLC staff to move the decisions of the steering committee forward as the collaborative's core team. So then one step up from there, the steering committee can also identify other members from this Great Lakes HABs community based on any needed expertise to accomplish specific tasks. So sometimes we tag in additional members outside of our steering committee to help us create certain products or put on certain events. So the steering committee plus is kind of that circle there. So these sub-teams may be specified for defined projects within the HABs Collaborative as well. The larger group here, this bubble that says HABs Collaborative, is interested stakeholders, and we kind of represent them as part of this HABs Collaborative listserv that we have. This is a moderated email group, and it includes all of the collaborative as well as other members who have an interest in this work within the region. So anyone can join the group, and we share news through our moderated messages. So that's how we have these stacked circles within each other that all link back into each other. And all of these groups are formed within a matrix of support provided by us at the Great Lakes Commission. Some of our dedicated staff assist with facilitating the HABs Collaborative meetings, both those of the co-chairs, the steering committee, and then larger regional events. We also help to manage the listserv, other web services, and we help to organize anything that the collaborative needs as they produce their communication tools for the larger Great Lakes HABs community. So the Great Lakes HABs Collaborative specifically focuses on the Great Lakes and then inland lakes within the Great Lakes watershed. So the scope of the collaborative includes the research and monitoring of harmful cyanobacteria and cladophora. However, we also look at interdisciplinary work that bridges environmental, social, like economic aspects to blooms as well. And those are all kind of key in emphasis for the collaborative. So within this scale and scope, all of the Great Lakes are considered, but we have special attention to persistent blooms, especially in the Western Lake Erie Basin, Green Bay and Lake Michigan, and Saginaw Bay and Lake Huron. But we're also looking at cutting edge research for newer blooms, especially in oligotrophic Lake Superior. So we're looking at all across both inland and Great Lakes HABs within the collaborative. And so with our mission, we understand that there is often a gap between this really great research that's being produced and HABs related papers, and then the regional managers having time to access and keep abreast of some of these issues. So therefore, the goal of the collaborative is really to link the great science and management in the region with this up-to-date information. So again, we have another diagram here. I'm really trying to show that our goal is to link key research within the scientific community to reduce the effect of silos, but also to bring these findings to the attention of managers or policymakers within the region. Though this intent is key for the collaborative, it can be difficult to determine who is the audience within that management category. So policy and decision makers regarding HABs happen at the federal, at the regional, the state, the provincial, and even local levels. So the HABs Collaborative is mindful of all of these different audiences when considering who are we reaching within that management community. We also recognize that the collaborative's work is publicly available on the Great Lakes Commission website. So how does the Great Lakes HABs Collaborative achieve all of our goals? And one aspect is to disseminate some of this information and awareness through both outreach and communication. One way that we do this is we have a dedicated X, formerly known as Twitter, presence, and we have this handle GL HABs Collab to share some of our HABs research and collaboration events, which I'll go through some of those events shortly here too. But in addition to our presence on social media, the collaborative uses several other tools to communicate about some research finding and some of our products, hoping to build a better regional understanding of harmful algal blooms. So as was stated earlier, interested stakeholders are included in a moderated listserv for the HABs Collaborative, and the Great Lakes Commission staff manage that service, which has directed 300 messages since it was started in 2016 to 386 precise members on the listserv. And we use that space really to share events, research articles, requests for funding proposals, materials related to regional HABs at the end of the day. Additionally, HABs Collaborative has a web page posted on the Great Lakes Commission website, and it provides information on the steering committee, a catalog of all of the collaborative's products and related links. The link that's presented at the top of this page will take you to the main collaborative site, which then directs you to all of the other landing pages with specific products. I'll go through what all of those products look like, but I can also post this link at the end of my presentation so that you can go visit the Great Lakes HABs Collaborative page. In addition to the tools for broad communication, we use a suite of more precise products to communicate key findings and management techniques to hopefully a diverse list of end users. And one such tool is the HABs State of Science webinar series. So this started back in 2016, and the collaborative has organized several webinars per year, and we present them all with up-to-date HABs research and projects geared towards HABs managers in the interested HABs community. So we started with a group of dedicated webinars in the summer of 2016, and that series particularly centered on HABs research, including modeling, bloom sources, safe drinking water, HABs detection, public health, HABs forecasting. And after those initial 8, now the collaborative continues to organize webinars and often partners with others to present talks with updates after a field season or from different projects around the Great Lakes Basin. So some of the key topics in the last couple years have been emergent technology and monitoring in the HAB space, policy effects on how that affects HABs projects in the basin, and the dynamics of the invasive mussels on harmful algal blooms. So again, if you go to our HABs Collaborative webpage, there is a backlog of all of these webinar recordings that you can go to our YouTube page and to be able to download all of those past webinars. But I did want to highlight that some of our more recent webinar topics has been looking at HABs hazard and response communications. So this is really from the public health sector. Recently, we also did a webinar series on HABs formation looking beyond nutrients and temperature. What were some of the other factors that may be playing into HABs formation, looking at genetics and HABs that are occurring in cold or oligotrophic lakes. So that was a really interesting webinar series. And I also wanted to highlight that we are starting a new webinar series actually this week on HABs mitigation and treatment. So if you go to our webpage, you're able to see a little bit more about the information coming up on some of our partners and how they're treating HABs or how they're mitigating HABs. And if you're interested, the first series in that webinar is occurring this Thursday, and you can register at this link at the bottom of the page here. So we hope you take advantage of some of our backlog of HABs Collaborative webinars. In addition, the HABs Collaborative also creates periodic newsletters. So we release between 3 to 4 every year. These newsletters present easy to understand HABs updates and findings with the regional in mind. So every newsletter includes space for a feature article, usually about some research or an event in the HAB space, or other projects or research of interest. And it also has information from HABs projects specifically in Canada to make sure that we have that binational interest to bridge those issues. Collaborative's co-chairs also share important updates about what's going on with the steering committee. The community shares important events and conferences of note. And the newsletter also provides a chance for members to spotlight themselves, including a spotlight for early career work or fellows. So as with the webinars, a backlog of all of our digital newsletters are available at the link here. And if you are ever interested in writing a short article or having a feature of yourself for our member spotlight, please do get in contact with me. We're always happy to include more people in that regional perspective for the HABs Collaborative newsletter. Additionally, the HABs Collaborative has created products more targeted for managers to understand key topics and knowledge gaps for harmful algal blooms in the region. And one such project has been some fact sheets that we've been putting out. They're usually about 2 to 3 pages to make sure they're accessible, to provide information and visuals from prominent research aimed to inform the management community, both policymakers or those that are interested in HABs. An example of the fact sheet here created in 2021, as I wanted to make sure that I had a little bit of time to talk about some of our interesting fact sheets. Wanted to talk about this one here as a who does what guide. So all of these fact sheets are available on the HABs Collaborative webpage, and you can download them under the publication and documents section. And currently the steering committee is focused on finalizing additional fact sheets connected to both the aquatic food web and agriculture, and updating some of these older fact sheets as well. So the fact sheets that are presented here look to demonstrate the roles in which agencies play in HABs work within the Great Lakes Basin for both the US and Canada. So we were looking at a who does what guide to make sure that if you had a question about HABs, that you could look more precisely at who is doing the specific work here, and whether that was a state or provincial or tribal natural resource agency all the way down to federal agencies as well. So this was a helpful guide for some people to understand who is doing what in the HABs space. So this chart also demonstrates the role of more regional, municipal, and local entities, and they're answering the question, who does what? So we have a whole backlog of additional fact sheets, including health effects for harmful algal blooms, as well as aerosolization health effects for harmful algal blooms. And these have been some really helpful fact sheets for the region for what is going on with HABs and human health. So we encourage you to look at all of the different fact sheets, as well as a knowledge gaps document that have been developed by the Harmful Algal Bloom Collaborative. I wanted to talk about one final product that has been developed by the HABs Collaborative, which we're calling the HABs Collaborative Research Mapper. So this was launched in March of 2022, and it is a web-based mapper that was designed to visualize the many HABs-related research projects happening throughout the region. In its conception, the mapper sought to capture information about the location, research focus, timing, funding, research team, and the description for specific HABs projects. These would also be research projects focused on the landscape as edge of field projects or nitrogen and sediment projects, as well as HABs monitoring and detection projects on the body of water. So we wanted to look at what's happening watershed wide in the HABs and nutrient space. So this is a screenshot of what the mapper is looking like today. So the collaborative is actively developing a communication strategy to promote this mapper, to build a connected network, really, of researchers to understand where other projects are being done and if the collaborative could be beneficial to some of this work. So if you are in the research space, I encourage you to take a look at the mapper on the HABs Collaborative webpage, share it with any of your research networks, and to add your own project if you are working on HABs research currently in the Great Lakes Basin. We are also willing to accept any feedback if you go through the mapper and have an idea. We're still kind of in the early stages of this. So feel free to check this out and be able to click through on the web to get some more information, particularly about what projects are being done, who are the project teams, and some more information about some of that research, hoping to build a better connected research network. You can follow this QR link to a direct link to the research mapper if you are interested in learning a little bit more or adding your own research. I wanted to highlight a couple other projects that the HABs Collaborative has going on. We help to facilitate some regional events. This past year, we hosted a summit with the Cooperative Institute for Great Lakes Research that was hosted at Ohio State University. And this was focused on some of the cutting edge research of HABs as they relate to disturbance ecology and looking how harmful algal bloom species may be interplayed with this idea of a disturbance affecting Great Lakes, inland lakes, and Great Lakes bodies of water to allow HABs to proliferate. And we brought together a group of scientists to discuss some of this work and are now working on a peer-reviewed paper and a white paper as an outcome of this summit. And coming up just next month, we are going to put on a science and policy workshop with the Great Lakes St. Lawrence Legislative Caucus to discuss some of the great work that the HABs research and agency communities are doing, and connecting them with local legislature to really highlight some of the great work and answer the question of what are some of the barriers to solving harmful algal bloom issues. Great Lakes Harmful Algal Bloom Collaborative also presents at regional conferences. So we have members that facilitate sessions at several conferences of interest throughout the Great Lakes science community. We've presented at the North American Lake Management Society conference last year, and we will have ongoing sessions at the International Association for Great Lakes Research Conference, the IAGLR conference, as well as the Association for Sciences of Limnology and Oceanography, so the ASLO conference. So if you are attending either of those, please look out for harmful algal bloom sessions hosted by the HABs Collaborative. We'd be happy to have you join us at those conferences. And lastly, I wanted to touch on one more effort that we have going, which is to create a common agenda. So this is really how we're going to hopefully accelerate some of our efforts for the HABs Collaborative by creating a shared vision, purpose, and strategy section under the Harmful Algal Bloom Collaborative to understand both of a benchmark of where we're at in the HABs space within the region and how we could be doing even better with some of these particular strategies. So we are developing right now this common agenda with our steering committee to guide where the HABs Collaborative is going to go in the future. So with that, I did want to open it up for any questions. If you have any follow-up, feel free to email me. My email is on this screen. And we also encourage you to take a look at some of our other Great Lakes Commission work that is related to harmful algal blooms with the blue accounting Lake Erie algae issue, which I believe that was already shared in the chat by Vice Chair Bruno. But thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you, Connor. Excellent job. And you know that you bring up a good point, as I always like to highlight the work of the Great Lakes Commission. And while everyone on the presentation today may not have a background in the commission, it's really a place for all 8 Great Lakes states and our associate members, the provinces, to come together to discuss issues, but really the strength of the role of the Interstate Compact Agency itself is to collect, try to interpret, and relay the results of common information gathering and policy construction. And so, serving as vice chair of the commission over the next couple of years, the great work of the commission is always, I always like to bring that forward. And so, looking forward, if I could just ask the first question here, you mentioned that you have an upcoming policy, essentially summit, where the states will be sending representatives to really discuss how to begin addressing harmful algal blooms, through this political lens and legal lens. What types of things do you imagine coming out of that session to bring this issue forward so that we can manage it better in the states?
I'm not 100% sure how much legislature knows about harmful algal blooms and the work that is already being done. But our hope is to present the problem as being pretty widespread, because it starts in the watershed with nutrient loading into the waters. But then there's also a lot of complexity with all of the different conditions and species that affect harmful algal blooms. And so I think our hope is to highlight the need for more cutting edge research around how harmful algal blooms are formed, and kind of the gap that's between management and treatment, to understand that there's not going to be a silver bullet with solving HABs. It is a large, complex issue, especially on some of the large lakes like Lake Erie. And so I don't know that we have a hope for what exactly is going to come out of that summit, because we want it to be really specific to each individual state and province, to understand what are those barriers that are holding you back, what maybe you can learn from other states and provinces if they've encountered the same barriers, and maybe have a chance to talk with them. And then we're hoping to leave the summit, the workshop, with have those conversations, and maybe 1 or 2 really targeted ideas, whether that be funding or a connected research network or connected agency network, like something that could be a tangible next step.
Yeah, Erica had mentioned, Erica from DEP had mentioned that, on the state level, we've been trying to coordinate our agencies to have a common message and approach to harmful algal blooms. And, that summit that's coming up that the commission is holding and the HABs collaborative is facilitating, I think, it's going to have a wide spectrum of disciplines from each one of the states attending that to really add information into it. Like, for instance, we have the Pennsylvania Department of Health, the Pennsylvania Department of Conservation, Natural Resources, our DEP, as well as academia, who are, very well versed in this issue to help add perspective from the Pennsylvania standpoint. And so I'm looking forward to seeing what comes out of that from not only the Pennsylvania side, but all the other states and provinces. Did we have any other questions, Amber, for Connor?
Not a question, but a compliment. Thank you. Great presentation, very useful and informative. And I'll say, just on my end, I work very closely with the HAB task force in Erie, and I'd love to collaborate with you and work further on some of our outreach items that we've been looking into.
Yeah, would love to connect on that. We're happy to, when we have state representation, to help us with our regional collaborative. Wonderful.
Well, thank you so much, Connor, for joining us. And again, everyone, give him a round of applause in the reactions and the webinar abilities. And we will move further into our agenda. Thanks, Connor. Hey, Mark, you are up next. Hey, we are ending today with a special guest presentation from Mark Rowe from NOAA. Mark develops models to understand and predict challenges in the physical, chemical, and biological characteristics of the Great Lakes. His recent work has focused on development of linked hydrodynamic and biological models to simulate harmful algal blooms and hypoxia in Lake Erie and impacts of invasive quagga mussels on primary production nutrient cycles and the lower food web of Lake Michigan. He has contributed to forecast models that provide timely and actionable information to public water systems, anglers, and recreational users of Lake Erie. Dr. Rowe received his MS and PhD degrees from Michigan Technological University, where he has conducted research on measurement and modeling of atmospheric deposition of persistent organic pollutants to Lake Superior. So with that, Dr. Rowe, I will turn it over to you.
All right, thanks, Amber. Can you hear me okay and see my slide?
Yep, everything
Great.
looks good.
Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you all today. My colleague Craig Stowe is going to give a slightly different presentation, but I have a presentation here related to Lake Erie hypoxia that I can share today. So this will provide a little bit of general background on the hypoxia issue in Lake Erie, and then give some detail on this Lake Erie hypoxia forecast that NOAA has been developing over the past several years and will transition to an operational branch of NOAA for the first time this season. So just starting out.
I think you may have stopped sharing accidentally.
Oh, okay. Is that better?
Yes.
Okay. So yeah, just starting out with a definition of hypoxia, which is sometimes referred to as a dead zone. So that's a condition of low dissolved oxygen in water. Usually the threshold is less than 2 milligrams per liter, sometimes less than 4. Can have impacts on more sensitive species. It's an impairment to fish and other aquatic life, and it can also have impacts on drinking water treatment, which I'll mention later. So there are two conditions that lead to development of hypoxia. One is stratification of the lake, which isolates bottom water from the atmosphere. So that stratification is related to the warming up of the surface water in the summer and the density difference between the warm water on the surface and the cold water on the bottom, which prevents vertical mixing in the lake and replenishment of oxygen in that bottom water. And then in addition, there needs to be a rate of biochemical oxygen demand that's high enough to deplete the dissolved oxygen in the bottom water prior to the end of stratification. And that second part is related to excessive nutrient inputs to the lake. So just to provide a little more historical background on hypoxia in Lake Erie. So it's something that's been happening for quite some time, although it has varied somewhat in severity over time. So I'm just showing this figure here from this paper in Environmental Science and Technology, where the symbols are the annual extent of hypoxia, which is based primarily on a US EPA monitoring program. And then the shaded areas are from a statistical model that was developed in this paper that are showing the contributions of the two components there, one being the impact of springtime air temperatures, which again is driving that stratification of the lake and how early the lake stratifies. And then the second one being the impact of long-term phosphorus loading. So in this paper, they related hypoxia extent to phosphorus loading averaged over about 7 or 8 years. So while like the Western Basin harmful algal bloom is kind of responsive to loading of nutrients in the same year, like March through July, the hypoxia is more responsive to a longer term average of nutrient loading, which builds up that organic matter in the bottom of the lake, which is consuming the oxygen. So while that previous slide was focusing on kind of long-term changes in hypoxia, this figure here is showing the short-term dynamics of dissolved oxygen at a nearshore drinking water intake. So the black line in this figure is from a sensor at the City of Avon Lake drinking water intake, which is located in near the Ohio shoreline of the Central Basin. And so you can see that the Dissolved oxygen is usually around 8 milligrams per liter during the summer, which is what you would expect equilibrated with the atmosphere at summertime water temperature. But you can see these sudden decreases in dissolved oxygen that occur sometimes where it suddenly drops below 2 milligrams per liter. And these are caused by upwelling events that bring the offshore bottom water into the nearshore areas, and those are typically wind-driven. And it's that kind of event that was the focus of this forecast that we developed. So low dissolved oxygen in itself doesn't really have an impact on drinking water treatment, but it's some other things that go along with the low dissolved oxygen in the hypoxic water. So the hypoxic water often has low pH and elevated manganese. So the manganese is a common element that occurs in soils and sediments, but under reducing conditions, it can become more water soluble in the water and then build up over the hypoxia season. And then once it's in the drinking water treatment system, it can be oxidized by chlorine and other oxidizers and form this yellow precipitate, which traditionally was regarded to be an aesthetic issue, but it's also being regulated for potential health reasons as well. So that's something that the water treatment plants need to keep under control. And then the figure on the right is showing a high correlation between pH and dissolved oxygen in the Lake Erie bottom water. Those are data from the drinking water intakes. And the reason why those are related is because the same mechanism that's consuming the dissolved oxygen, which is aerobic respiration by the microbial community, it's also producing carbon dioxide, which causes the pH to go down. And the drinking water plants, they need to keep the pH greater than about 7.5 in the treated water to prevent corrosion in the distribution system, which could expose people to lead and copper. So that's how the hypoxia can influence drinking water treatment. So we had this project in 2017 through 2021 that was funded by the NOAA Coastal Hypoxia Research Program to develop this forecast system that could give public water systems advance notice of these upwelling events that can bring hypoxic water into the nearshore drinking water intakes. So at the beginning of this project, we did some focus groups at 7 different public water systems, mainly along the Ohio shoreline of the central basin of Lake Erie, to determine whether there was a need for this type of a forecast. And the water system operators told us that it would be useful to have advance notice of these upwelling events because they could use that to alert their staff of upcoming rapid changes in water quality. They can potentially increase their sampling and monitoring frequency, and they can also have their equipment and treatment chemicals kind of on standby and ready to go to respond to these dynamic events. So this is showing the flow of information in this forecast system model that we developed. So this uses weather forecast information from the National Weather Service, and that drives the Lake Erie operational forecast system, which is a numerical ocean model that takes as input like wind and air temperature and so forth, and then predicts 3-dimensional currents, the vertical mixing in the lake, and temperature. And then we developed this additional component to the model, which is tracking sources and sinks of dissolved oxygen in the water, including exchange with the atmosphere, consumption of oxygen by water column and sediment oxygen demand, and by the reduced substances that diffuse out of the sediment during the summer season. So we had this paper in 2019 in which we described this forecast model and did a rigorous assessment comparing the model predictions to observations from various research programs in Lake Erie. And so this set of figures is showing kind of the seasonal progression of bottom dissolved oxygen in Lake Erie. So in the upper left here in June, the lake is kind of in the early stratified season, and the bottom dissolved oxygen is just starting to decline. Then a month later in July, you're starting to see these blue areas, which are indicating hypoxia, dissolved oxygen less than 2. And in these figures, the background color here is from the model, and then these symbols are from measurements. So those would be sensor data that we compiled. And those are on the same color scale. So when the color is the same as the background, then that means the model's in agreement with the observations. So you can see in July, the hypoxia often initiates kind of near the shoreline. And then in August, it's filling in throughout the central basin. And then in September, it starts to retreat further offshore as the surface of the lake cools. And then that surface mixed layer and thermocline get deeper and deeper. And then the place where the thermocline intersects the bottom determines the edge of the hypoxic zone. So then as the lake cools down, that gets further and further offshore until at some point in October, the lake becomes well mixed from top to bottom again. And then that's the end of the hypoxia season. So here we have, if this will work, it's an animation. Oh, there we go. So this is an animation of the 2019 hypoxia season. So showing bottom temperature and bottom dissolved oxygen in Lake Erie. So here it's starting over again. You can see in the blue areas on the bottom panel, hypoxia setting in along the shoreline. And you can see kind of the dynamic movement of that bottom hypoxic layer as the winds kind of push it around. And so that's the mechanism that brings these hypoxic events to the nearshore drinking water intakes. So we found that in July, when the hypoxia sets up, it often sets up first along the Ohio shoreline of the Central Basin, more so than on the Canadian side. And we found that that's driven by years that have a predominant southwesterly component to the wind, which kind of tilts the thermocline, causes the hypolemnium to be thinner along the Ohio shoreline, earlier onset of hypoxia. In some years, which was less frequent, when the June-July wind doesn't have that strong southwesterly component, then you see hypoxia initiating more uniformly along the north shore and the south shore. But more often you get this predominant southwesterly wind case. So that's kind of the general pattern, but then you get these less common wind events from the northeast, and those are the ones that cause the upwelling events that bring the hypoxic bottom water in along the Ohio shoreline. And so we found that these events were associated with wind from the northeast at greater than about 15 knots, and then particularly if it's sustained for more than a day or two, that'll cause a more significant upwelling event. So there's one of these upwelling events that I'll highlight that occurred in September of 2021 that had some impacts. So this is a forecast graphic that appeared on our website for the forecast on August 31st of 2021, showing the condition that existed just before this upwelling event. So we have the bottom temperature shown on the upper panel, and then the bottom dissolved oxygen on the lower panel. So the blue areas indicating hypoxia, and then this yellow band along the shorelines indicating that the hypoxia is separated from the shoreline. It's somewhat offshore. And then the symbols here showing like these are sensors in the public water system intakes at Lorain and Avon Lakes. So they were not experiencing hypoxia at that time on August 31st. And then this is another graphic from the forecast webpage. So this one is showing the change in bottom temperature and dissolved oxygen over the forecast period. So the blue color is indicating predicted decrease in bottom temperature and dissolved oxygen along the Ohio shoreline. So that's indicating this predicted upwelling event. And then the windrows plot, which we also have on the web page. So again, when you see the red bars here in this northeast quadrant, that's indicating northeast wind predicted at greater than about 15 knots and predicted for 2 days, sustained. So that's the type of wind event that would drive these upwellings. So with all that, we sent out one of these notices to our email list. We have an email list of about 120 or so recipients, including public water systems, researchers, state agencies, and so forth, who have an interest in these events. So we sent out this event, giving advance notice of this early September Lakely upwelling event. And the event did occur and got some media coverage because there was a odor associated with the upwelling event. So this bottom water, the hypoxic bottom water, can have things like hydrogen sulfide in it. So that was a smell that people noticed along the shoreline, and there were a lot of inquiries about that. In some cases, it was mistaken for a gas leak. But you can see this screenshot from the evening news where they used some of the graphics from our forecast to explain to the public what was going on in association with this event. And there was also a fish kill associated with the event. So normally the fish can avoid the hypoxic zone, but in these upwelling events where the hypoxic bottom water comes right into the shoreline, sometimes fish can get trapped against the shoreline, resulting in a fish kill. So the Ohio DNR, they appreciated having advance notice of this event, because then when they got calls about this fish kill, they already had an idea of what was causing it, and didn't need to suspect like a chemical spill or something like that. They already had an explanation for what was happening based on the forecast. And then from the Cleveland water system is the biggest one that's affected by this issue, serves about 2 million people. So they said that the hypoxia forecast gives them the opportunity to alert their staff that something is likely to happen, where they can potentially increase the frequency of monitoring and then have equipment and chemicals on standby. In this case, they were able to get a shipment of sodium hydroxide expedited in time for this event. So that's what they used to adjust the pH back up above 7.5 to maintain their corrosion control measures for the distribution system to avoid exposing people to lead potentially. So just to wrap up with the next steps for this hypoxia forecast. So we've been producing it at NOAA GLORAL experimentally since 2017 and sharing it through our webpage. And this year, starting in July, the hypoxia forecast is going to be run operationally at NOAA National Centers for Coastal Ocean Science, replacing our experimental version. So there'll be a new web page. We are going to do some stakeholder feedback on the new web page. If anybody's interested in participating in that, feel free to reach out to me. And then also, if anyone's interested in being added to the distribution email list for notices about the forecast, feel free to reach out. So that's all I have for my presentation.
Hey, thank you, Dr. Rowe. And this is a really interesting topic for people who are interested in water, and especially from a state perspective. When you see how many different issues are touched by hypoxia and hypoxic events, like I'll just list a few here. Potential fish kills. And so that's something that raises the public awareness immediately. And you have calls that flood into your phone banks about possible pollution event. You have like general odors that are going on across entire regions. And people are wondering, what is that odor? Is there a gas leak down the thing? And so you have tons of calls that go into that. And probably even more important are our drinking water resources and these intakes to our public drinking water plants. That changes in oxygen levels and pH can really affect the treated drinking water, as well as the infrastructure that it travels through. It can, if the drinking water pH is too low, it can help mobilize things like lead and copper into the drinking water. That's obviously detrimental to our health. So this is an important issue, and like, the creation of all of this is really neat. I can imagine the science that went behind it, and you kind of detailed that. Can I ask you what examining over the past 10 years that you've been collecting the data, building the model, and then seeing some of the results that have come out? How do you envision what we have looked at in terms of predictions for climate change inside of our region? How would the hypoxia be affected by what some of those predictions are calling out?
Yeah, that's a good question. As I mentioned, there's kind of two factors that contribute to hypoxia. One is the stratification of the lake, And then the other one is the sediment oxygen demand, or the buildup of organic matter in the lake. So on the first one, if we do have warmer seasons, warmer springtime, that could cause the lake to stratify earlier and longer. So that could potentially make the lake more sensitive to hypoxia. And then on the nutrient loading side, there's been some studies on that. Changes in precipitation and runoff, for example, can have an impact on the nutrient loading side of things. So those are two different ways that climate change could affect the hypoxia issue. Are you muted? I'm not hearing you.
I see that Christine Phillips was way ahead of me on that question by asking about how the thermocline patterns would be altered by predicted climate change. There's another question on here. Do you know the pH threshold for heavy metals to leach from pipes?
From what I heard, the drinking water systems try to maintain the pH greater than 7.5. And don't quote me on that. You'd have to ask the experts, but I think it was when it dips below that level, then they're going to add sodium hydroxide or something like that in the treatment to get it up above that, so that to maintain their corrosion control measures for the treated water.
Excellent. Amber, did you have any questions, or do you see any additional questions from our participants?
Not any additional questions, but I feel like I really want to make this comment from Jim Grazio open, because it's really nice. He says, Mark, we've spoken in the past, and if you don't remember Jim, I'm sure you do, but he's our Great Lakes biologist here in Erie. He says, thanks for your work. It has been very helpful and useful. And I think that that sentiment is very evident in what you presented today, and we're really thrilled that we could have you.
Yeah, we've appreciated working with Jim over the years. He's shared some really great monitoring data with us from his Lake Erie program.
Wonderful. Okay, well, thank you so much, Mark. Tim, do you have any final remarks as I share the ending slide? And yes, please, let's give Mark a round of applause using those reactions.
Thank you, Dr. Rowe. And just to conclude, if we don't have any additional questions, like I had mentioned at the beginning of the forum, this is the first in many over the coming months. We have 2 additional forums coming up in 2024, and this program is anticipated to run until at least mid-2025. And I think there's a lot of benefits that come out of the presentations that are given here, and how we dig a little bit deeper in some of the issues that are affecting the Great Lakes and the Erie region. And so Amber is sharing her screen on the save the dates. And this marks a momentous occasion. June 18th, we are going to be meeting in person for the first time, and we commit to meeting in person at least once a year, so that everybody can become more familiar with each other again, and have the opportunity to meet in person at Presque Isle State Park. And as of right now, we will forward the actual meeting location information. We may be meeting at the Tom Ridge Environmental Center, or potentially another place on the park, but that will be forwarded. Be sure to sign up for notifications under the PA Leaf webpage. The September 16th and December 17th will both be held virtually, and we'll be informing more about what the topics to be covered will be for those dates. And so, Amber, I will turn it back over to you to bring us out.
Thanks, Tim. Thank you again to all of our presenters, and the information here was just wonderfully shared, and at a really timely point in our regional efforts to be aware of HABs as they pop up. So don't forget, what you learned today as you go out and might be exposed to some of these HABs, and now you know how to report them, and some of the great research that's occurring regionally and locally. There is a QR code on your screen. If you could scan that with your smartphone and take our just very short survey. I would greatly appreciate your feedback. I also dropped the link into the chat. This is an opportunity for you to tell us what you want to hear at future LEAF meetings. So that is really important that, we are constantly reevaluating the information that we're bringing to this group of people, and we want to hear from you. So please take our survey. It will only take 2 or 3 minutes of your time, and it really helps us drive forward the next conversations that we have. With that, we will all gather again in June, and more information to follow. So we'll see you in June in person. We're thrilled about that. And I hope you all have a tremendous Tuesday and a great rest of your week.